This is an Ampersounds production.
This is a social contract of living in London. I want this to be a city that is nice to live in, that like everyone can live in, that is not just like some nightmarish dystopia where like only rich people live in certain parts and everyone else is forced into them. You know, like you see that in science fiction, and that is the world I think that they would like to build, one in which like the market dictates the city.
I'm here with Aydin Dikerdem, councillor for Wandsworth. How's it going?
I'm good. Nice to be here.
Thank you for coming. I'm really interested to hear about Wandsworth. Wandsworth is a interesting borough in terms of local politics. You know, you grew up there, right?
Grew up in Battersea. Yeah. I mean, throughout this, I'm gonna really nerd out and be like, so I'm not the councillor for Wandsworth. I'm the councillor for a specific ward in the London Borough of Wandsworth.
Can you tell me what it is?
Which is Shaftesbury and Queenstown ward, which has, the boundaries have changed in my lifetime as a councillor. So I've been a councillor just under 10 years now, and it started off as Queenstown ward. Then there were some boundaries were redrawn. So it used to have 9 Elms in it. So I was quite politicised through, obviously, what happened in 9 Elms.
I mean, you've just covered loads of things.
Yeah. So I'm going to slow down, but and you know, I feel like lots of people are learning a little bit more about local government now because of the recent local government elections, which I'm sure we'll cover as well. But yeah, so the borough is made up of these different wards, and each ward has like 2 or 3 councillors in it.
How did you come to represent that ward?
Big starting question. So what is the quickest way of saying? Well, the way that it works in the Labour Party is that there's a selection process. What happened is, and it is a massive accident of history, basically. So it's 2016. My wards, which I would go on to represent, Queenstown, had been Conservative since 1992. But in 2014, a single Labour councillor called Sally Ann Efferson had made it through. She was quite a local person. She'd made it by about 60 votes, and it was seen as quite a big win for the local Labour Party. She was an amazing woman. She sadly had sickle cell, so she passed away during her term. So there was a by-election, and I ended up running to be selected in that by-election with no hope of being selected to be the candidate. Like, I was a member of Momentum. I was like, I'd been in the Labour Party for a couple of years. I knew the local Labour Party, they knew me. But I was really running because the Trades Council, which is a local body of trade unions, which I was would go to and was a delegate at. The Trades Council had been running a campaign around estate demolition. So throughout the 2010s, there were lots of controversial regenerations and estate demolition. And there was a campaign around trying to make sure that if an estate was going to be demolished, residents got a vote. It was called the ballots policy. It is now policy, and we can come on to that because that was a big campaign. So my kind of real job was to turn up to the selection and talk about regeneration in Wandsworth, because there were some big regenerations happening in the Alton, the Winstanley estate, and push for that policy of ballots to say, you know, I grew up in this area, I'm sick and tired of what's happening with housing, and the Tories are going to do these big regenerations on our existing council estates, and residents should get a vote in that. They should get a say, because at the time, you didn't get balloted on if your estate was going to get demolished or not. So I don't know if I've said this before, but like, I had a holiday booked the next day after selection. Like, I was not meant to get selected. So I turn up, you know, give my speech about being someone who grew up in the area, you know, local kid. I'm 24 years old. I talk about council housing. I talk about housing. And then the Labour members select me. I didn't even know what a councillor was. So then it's like, well, you know, I think a lot of people were like, well, it's a Tory ward. He's probably not going to win it. It doesn't matter. We had a month to run the by-election. This is in November 2016. So like, Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the Labour Party. We are miles behind in the polls.
So everyone's time where they did the chicken coup.
It's exactly. So like, everyone's like, well, this Momentum kid isn't going to win. And we smashed it. Like, it was a test case for like, I just got all my mates out. We got loads of members. We got higher turnout on some of the estates in my ward than had happened in the 2015 general election previously. So it was like this this big moment. And then I was just thrown into the deep end of local government and being a councillor, having not really even known what a councillor was.
Nice. Well, let's rewind, because I think people will be thinking, why do I need to care about Wandsworth? Why do I need to care about local government? Like, it's very niche, but like loads of people, like these last elections, they were very consequential, and then lots of people who are influential, like start out in local government, like Morgan McSweeney and people like that. But like Wandsworth is quite interesting because famously, or not famously, whatever, it was like Thatcher's favourite borough, constituency, whatever it is. And it was in many ways a test case for neoliberal politics that we still live in today.
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit of context about that?
Yeah,
about the kind of Wandsworth that you grew up in? And
exactly.
That,
I mean, I always make the same joke, right? Everyone's like, neoliberalism begins in Chile with the rise of Pinochet and the getting rid of Allende. But a year before, in 1978, Wandsworth falls to the Tories, and they pioneer this like brand new right wing agenda, which is like local councils in the 1970s. We have to like go back and it's almost hard to imagine, because Thatcherism changes the social fabric of reality so much. We can't imagine, but like councils had all these powers. They had these huge workforces. So the Wandsworth Tories go about doing these brand new things, which we now all live with, outsourcing. They start outsourcing different council departments onto these like private contracts. They test case right to buy. They start selling off entire estates en masse to developers. One across the border in Westminster, they get caught for that, and Shirley Porter gets prosecuted. But in Wandsworth,
what do you mean they get caught?
So there's a big scandal in the 1980s.
As in it's like illegal?
It's illegal because what they're doing is they're selling off at not the right value. They're privatizing housing before right to buy even exists as a thing.
Okay.
And they're also leaving properties empty to then sell. So there's this whole targeted decision to sell off the council housing stock and test out many of the policies that would then be adopted by the Thatcher government. And they were really ideological. Like they were radicals. They were like conservative radicals. They were breaking with the previous kind of maybe softer tradition of conservatism that had existed in the 1970s, and were the pioneering vanguard of the hardcore neoliberalism. Your Paul Beresfords, your Edward Listers, Christopher Chope, like these are all figures that came through Wandsworth. And we kind of, even in 1997, when the big Labour wave comes in Wandsworth, Labour loses seats on Wandsworth Council because they famously set like a zero council tax, poll tax at the time, and kind of live off this legacy of having a very low council tax. And through that low council tax, they get lots of people who might vote Labour in a national election to vote Conservative. And they have this like machine that holds on for 44 years, basically, regardless of the national political picture. And I think a lot of people who've grown up in London or lived in London recently, and even when I was, running to be a councillor and stuff, a lot of people, because local government is so hidden away, they didn't even quite realise that they'd been governed locally by the Conservatives for so long. Like only the older generation really knew. And even in this election, I was speaking to renters who thought that Wandsworth had been a Labour council forever. They had no idea how at risk it was, how fragile that project had been. So yeah, it's a very interesting political space to be so close to the centre of London and yet immersed in this quite fluctuating politics. Because again, of course, at the start of the century, in the 1920s and 1930s, Battersea in particular is like a radical hub of municipal socialism. Some of the first estates ever built are in my own ward, right? You've got like the Shaftesbury estate, which is run by Peabody now. Just over the road, by Battersea Fields, the Latchmere estate, one of the first ever purpose-built social housing for workers. A number of Irish migrants that came during the 19th century, and then the amount of like heavy industry, the dockyards, the railways, created like an insanely radical politics. We had a communist MP in the 1920s, Sapirjee Chakravarla, who was like a incredible kind of icon. We had Charlotte Despard. We were a real hotbed of radicalism. So it's an amazing kind of London geography of politics.
And I've heard this said about Thatcherism was part of the destruction of council homes was to like destroy Labour voters, essentially. Is that something that happened in Wandsworth during that time? Was it a purposely trying to like gentrify the area?
We have minuted in the 1980s, the chair of the housing committee, Peter Bingle, who would go on to be a like almost infamous property lobbyist in London, he said on record, and I might bungle the quote because I don't know it off by heart, I should. But, you know, his plan was to sell off 20,000 council homes and turn Wandsworth and turn Battersea into a conservative constituency. He says that, it's minuted. It's like, because that was their plan. Now, the ideological basis of that is like creating the home-owning, you know, aspirational middle class that was the bedrock of Thatcherism, right? So it's, you know, in our ears, we hear the kind of criminal conspiracy of social, you know, social change, and in their mind, they hear the kind of, they're literally living their political ideals, which is we are going to eradicate the kind of solidarity and reliance on the state that was inherent in social housing, the communities, working class communities that had lived there for a long time, and instead create these like little pockets of entrepreneurial homeowners that suddenly much more invested in interest rates and shares and the national economy. I mean, that was the Thatcher project, right? So it is, yeah. I mean, it was a direct political and ideological agenda.
So what kind of Wandsworth Council did you step into in 2016? You mentioned Nine Elms, and I'm thinking, you don't hear so much about it now, but it was that Sky Pool.
Yeah.
Am I thinking correctly? Yeah, that Sky Pool. Go and look it up, where it was just massive, like luxury build, and you were hearing all kinds of things where they had like affordable housing, and these people had like separate entrances and exits, and it was a real kind of just a kind of dystopian way to force people to live. So you're entering in 2016. They're basically an entrenched party that thinks they're never going to lose this seat. Yeah. What kind of council are you finding at that point? What challenges are you facing?
Yeah, so come in opposition at a time in which, particularly around housing, is very interesting because what's happened is you have the financial crash in 2008 and starts permissions awful of new housing, right? Everyone's worried that with the financial crisis, no one's going to build anything anymore. And Battersea Power Station, Nine Elms, that whole brownfield site, you know, derelict buildings, there had been a plan to rejuvenate it. And it basically, like, they're terrified it's all going to collapse because of the financial crash and the collapse in the markets, right? And house building is collapsing. So in that period, what happens is that David Cameron, the NPPF, there's deregulation. They try and incentivize developers to keep building. Famously, at Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms, they cut the amount of affordable housing that needs to be built from the 30%, which is kind of normal, down to 15%. And they call it this
30% already seems quite low.
Well,
in my head,
that was in the planning. The councils are meant to ask for 30% affordable housing, right? At the time, and this was to try and stimulate house building. And also interesting is, like, if neoliberalism is where the state, because if we think of neoliberalism as when the state has to intervene in order to liberate the markets, like, I think one of the things about neoliberalism that is kind of unique to it in the way that it is as a kind of modern historical process is it's not just like, oh, we get rid of the state. It's the state kind of facilitating. The state is really central in neoliberalism because it has to do the things necessary to kind of cripple itself. And that's what they do with the power station site, because they keep on a planning permission for this company called Treasury Holdings, which is an Irish property company that was meant to be doing the regeneration, which obviously isn't going to survive the crash. But they bludgeon through the existing to try and keep the scheme afloat. They pass a planning permission, and then the land value all collapses out, but it's stuck with this pre-crash land value. So the Wandsworth State is really active in facilitating the kind of processes that will lead to Nine Elms, because they're almost siding. They're siding, and look, we can discuss the ideological content of this, but they are siding with the private sector to try and make sure this regeneration happens. And then this Malaysian pension fund takes over, state pension fund, and I'm kind of coming in as that process is being negotiated out. And what's actually happened is, post-crash, the quantitative easing that's taken place, you know, which is when we kind of print loads of money and we tried that ends up having this huge asset boom. So at the exact point at which we're deregulating housing and we're making it, there's less affordable housing having to be built, and we're making it easier for the market to build housing and speculate without much kind of public good coming from it. Asset prices are soaring and interest rates are really low. So like it's this kind of golden window for house building, council house building, borrowing to build council house building, asking more from developers, but it doesn't happen because everyone's so worried the market's going to have collapsed. And I do think seriously, when I talk to the Conservatives who were in charge at the time, I think like, to what extent did they just make the wrong call, or to what extent were they seeing through their own beliefs? So Section 106, which is some of the money that was earmarked for affordable housing, they took that money and they used that to help build the tube line, right? Now, if you step back in time and looked at the current economic model, you see George Osborne in number 10, you know, what they were doing is they were taking the housing the money meant for council housing, they put it into the tube. The tube increases the value of the house prices for the private developers. So in some ways, they're recirculating the public money of residents of Wandsworth back into the development to raise the profits of the developer. The people of Wandsworth don't own that tube station. They don't get any income from people paying the ticket. We would have owned the social housing, like it would be a public asset. So and also, you know, local families would be able to live there. And so there's all these questions about how states intervene with the market that I was kind of watching happen in real time. And then, of course, the big explosion is in July of 2017 when the Battersea Power Station cuts the affordable housing level even more, from 15% to 9%, because they claim the costs have gone up. And again, the argument that we were making was profits are always privatized, losses are always socialized under this model that the Tories are running. So we ran this big campaign to get them to build out the affordable housing, and the Tories obviously sided with the developers. And so when I'm talking for too long, but when we came in 2022, that was one of our key red lines. And I can talk a bit about that battle because, you know, we were absolutely adamant we were going to get that affordable housing that was promised back. Even though they'd only promised 15%, to then lower it even lower. We were like, for communities to trust in the process of new house building, you have to stick to your promises. And if every time speculative development, which is what it is, the losses are then socialized, that is an unfair bargain between the public and the private sector, because we don't get the rewards when profits are maximized and interest rates are at low percent and quantitative easing causes an asset boom, and meanwhile we're deregulating planning. So that was the kind of political headwinds I was coming into. And also, what a time to be alive. It was 2016. It was the heart of the Corbyn movement. It was, you know, an exciting time to be a left-wing person in the Labour Party.
You said, was it these Tories making the wrong call, or was it them seeing out their ideological project? What would you say?
It's a really hard one because you can never really get, you know, some of them, I think 100%, you know, it's not an accident that like the main funder of the Conservative Party is the developers and the landowners. They are one of the most powerful interest groups in the country. That's like not an accident. So when they deregulate planning precisely at the time in which like borrowing is quite easy and asset prices are starting to really skyrocket because of quantitative easing, they didn't then reverse that. They continued it. It wasn't, you know, Boris Johnson didn't use the economic environment that he inherited post-quantitative easing to build more affordable housing. He, like, as Mayor of London, explicitly reduced affordable housing. Who was his main advisor? Edward Lister, former leader of Wandsworth Council, right? So I think there are definitely sections which completely understood the market forces they were unleashing and were really happy for it, and their donor class and the function that they play in the role of capital, fine. There were probably others that were like, 2008 financial crisis had just happened, building is going to completely collapse, we have to do something to stimulate supply. But it's just they never, once conditions had changed and everyone was going, well, look, asset prices are soaring, interest rates are low, why don't we take out some loans and build some council housing? Why don't we ask more from developers? Why don't we change the MPPF and change the like rate of profit that makes something viable or not? They didn't listen. They didn't listen to the shelter reports that complained about the viability loophole, which allowed developers to get away with not delivering affordable housing even when they could afford to. Like, they didn't listen. So my guess is that Conservatives had by that point moved far away from any agenda that was going to deliver either either affordable housing or concessions from building housing. And the reason why, sometimes in the debates around housing, there's lots of arguments about, well, why should private developers or private house builders have to give anything back to the public? We live in a city. Land is finite. The question of what happens on the land in the city that I live in is relevant to me. And it can't just be left to the market, because this is a social contract of living in London. I want this to be a city that is nice to live in, that everyone can live in, that is not just some nightmarish dystopia where only rich people live in certain parts and everyone else is forced into them. You see that in science fiction, and that is the world I think that they would like to build, one in which the market dictates the city. I believe in the right to the city. I'm going to fight for an urbanism, for a vision of London that is not one that is fundamentally built on market values, but is built on how do we collectively as a society agree to what happens on the land where we live. And of course, people go, this is nuts. This is private property. This is private land. That's one of the foundations of English capitalist liberal democracy. And I say, well, that's what the planning policy is for. That's what planning rules were created for. After the war, we invented planning to make it so that the commons wasn't just at the mercy of existing landowners or landholders in the private sector, but that there was some state guidance on what a beautiful, healthy, fair commons looks like. I believe in that.
Oh, let's get into that 2022 period. But all these new builds, this is just what's on my mind. All these new builds now seem to be, and I don't know what's your experience in the process of running a council and the planning aspect of it. All these new builds seem to be designed by people who have no idea what living in them is even like. If you look at even the kind of turn of the century housing and the post-war housing, it was built around a community, but it was also built around a family, and some of it, traditional kind of family styles, but it was built so you could see the outdoor space from the kitchen so the kids can play in there, and it's all built in this communal way. Whereas now housing just seems to be built with no sense of how communities function with each other and what it's like to live in them. And it's just kind of how many boxes can I fit into this building to sell for however much, rather than what is this going to feel like to live in? Who is going to live here? What kind of community are we trying to make? I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, I mean, I do think design standards have improved over the decades. And I think that there's also, housing is complicated because obviously some housing that probably at the time was not seen as that desirable or great relative to modern house building is now the thing that everyone wants to live in, right? Which is possibly what was a little worker's cottage in East London or in Battersea is now £1 million street property, that an Edwardian street property or whatever. So there's there's a lot of changing concepts around what is good housing. I think I'd push back a little bit on the question around, because we have to be careful. Because it's so politicized that you've got people who don't want anything tall or dense ever to be built, and I think honestly we're past that stage if we're to really make London a place where lots of people can live. So I don't want to fall into the camp of we can't build anything, or nothing is a good building unless everyone has a garden, because then you actually look at loads of places in Europe where you've got beautiful gentle density modern apartments which families live in and thrive in and are happy, and there's communal play space. And I actually always lean towards the kind of design principles we have in social housing. The design principles in the social housing that we built under our administration, that focus on sure, we're going to try and make sure as many people can get access to this social housing as possible. We're going to do it in a way that provides large family home units. It can't all just be 1-bedroom units. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be any 1-bedroom units, because actually 1-bedroom ground floor units with a garden is perfect for someone who might want to downsize. Like if you're an older council tenant in a 3-bedroom property paying bedroom tax, your kids have moved out, that's actually, rather than forcing you out of your home, we find you somewhere where you actually would like to live, and it'd be a good place to kind of retire to. And then we free up a family unit, right? So making sure that we're trying to address as many needs as possible. You're absolutely right that in the kind of private sector, they've built way too many 1-bed sale units. That's part of the collapse in the flat market. So that speculative driven model of how can we make as much money as possible without thinking through the realistic, I absolutely agree with you there. And so it is really like housing is really complicated. So if you do just build in the middle of nowhere with no transport connections, a giant tower full of 1-beds and try and sell them now with skyrocketing service charges, that's not even going to sell. So then that's a waste. We should never have given permission for that in an empty building, right?
It's not so much about the tower. I'm supportive of towers. Like, I'm a Londoner, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm supportive of towers. There was towers that got torn down where I grew up in West London, and like some of the flats in there were nice flats that were built maybe in the 50s and 60s or whatever. It's more the culture around it where, again, it's like not built for families, not built for because my assumption is anyone who's making the decisions in these property developing companies are not thinking about what it's actually like to live in them. So they're just kind of white boxes. I don't know. This is just an anecdote.
Yeah, but the thing is, you've got my approach to developers has always been like, it's not a moral question. I'm not going to I'm not going to be mad that the tiger wants to eat me. Like, it's a tiger. This is a private company that's goal is producing shareholder value. Like, it's trying to make money. It's not going to, in some ways it's not going to build something that doesn't make money. And when it does that, someone's getting fired. But it's going to try and do something that maximizes as much money as it can get. It's not really interested in like the experience of the tenant afterwards. Loads of the Section 106s that we see of housing associations and other quite like expensive schemes where like Peabody might have taken on a shared ownership block, we're actually finding out that that's a massive problem because developers long gone. They don't have to deal with the management. They've given that over to a housing association. So you're totally right that like sometimes they're absolutely just not thinking about the reality of the building. Service charge is a massive one. Like, they've built buildings where the service charges keep going up to the point at which, like, what is the point of being a homeowner if you're spending $1,000 a month on service charges or whatever, because you're basically renting, like the aspiration of home ownership doesn't work. So you're totally right that like, that is a challenge. But again, like, it's not really a moral question. That is why we have the planning system. The planning system is to try and ensure that like market mechanism is tapered to a real world life experience. The planning system can also go too far sometimes, right? Like, it can pose challenges for building beautiful, well-functioning buildings. And, I don't want this to become a podcast about YIMBY NIMBYism, because there's you can just go on Twitter and spend your life doing that. But there are certainly things that can be like challenging for any builder, whether they're a social housing builder or a private builder. But it's just understanding, like, it's politics. Like, are you someone that fundamentally thinks the market is going to solve the housing question? Or do you think the state needs to intervene because marketization hasn't worked? And increasing marketization is like the world that we live in. And that really is the battle lines. And that shapes how you deal with the developer. When we went into negotiations with Battersea Power Station, again, it's not a moral question. The question was, how do we leverage what's in the interests of Battersea Power Station? And the thing that we did is we just like cut off all like contact as a council. Like, we isolated them. We didn't allow them to be part of borough of culture. We like played really hardball. We didn't like say, oh, well, we really want you to build the affordable housing, but if you're not going to do that, we'll like be soft on these other areas. We just like really held our ground as a local authority under a huge amount of pressure, because we understood that this fundamentally at the end of the day was about shareholder value. It wasn't a moral question about whether the developer is nice or not, or whether we're nice. It's my role is like a trade unionist. Like my role is to get the best outcome for the residents of Wandsworth. It is not to prop up private speculation. Sometimes that factors in, jobs. You don't want to bankrupt an entire scheme and cause misery to, empty buildings and things like that. That's the line you're traipsing, but you're fundamentally there to represent the interests of residents and extract as much public value for those residents from people who are coming to your borough to speculate and make money. Like if we just left it to the market, a place like Wandsworth that I've grown up in would just be devoured by the international capital. It just would be, because it's like zone 1 and 2, central London, riverside borough. Like we have to have some protections, otherwise none of us are making it through, And that's again, for maybe, our parents and for us, we actually lived in London when people didn't really want to live here.
Yeah.
So like, it can be a bit painful when suddenly it's like, well, we were here for the hard times, but then we don't get to be here for the good times. That's the unfairness in some of the arguments around gentrification that I think are really important and emotive for people, right?
It is really funny how things have changed. The Elizabeth line is like the massive one. And that was going on for ages. And they were talking about what the Elizabeth line was going to do for like 20 years. And then finally it kind of has like these areas that like no one wanted to live in are suddenly like, they're getting investment. And I guess like it's good, but also for the people that actually grew up there, that are actually part of the community.
We're not going to win if we're anti-growth and we're anti-house building. We're just not, because like we do need to making an area better. The question is not about the question for a left and the socialists, right? If you're a socialist and you're trying to navigate the thorny question of gentrification and what alliances and coalitions you can build, the question is about fairness. It's about like who gets to benefit from these changes, and do the people who have struggled, who have made an area cool, like have been there for the hard times. They should also have a stake, and. On the opposite side of things, if we lean too much into the kind of like nativism of the gentrification debates, we alienate like loads of people who are part of our coalition. Like as someone who grew up in London, if I was just like, anyone who comes to Wandsworth is just like a gentrifier who's ruining my area, they should be my comrades. They're people who are often paying through the nose on flat shares, who didn't have the luck of having parents who were born in London, had to come here for work, could have come from a place that didn't have much work, are making a life for themselves. Like they should be part of the team that is fighting for more social housing, more rent control, a fairer settlement. It'd be a mistake if we started pitting ourselves against them. I look at places like New York, Mamdani, where he's been really good at kind of building that kind of what you'd call like the hipster left coalition of millennial renters who are just feeling really, really hard done by, but also speaking to long-term New York residents who have been in NYCHA housing, who have just had been left in terrible conditions and fighting for rent freezes and rent controlled apartments as well. So that's the coalition you've got to build. And, the right are trying to divide us. Sometimes the left can get a bit, make mistakes and make everything about a kind of authenticity politics around gentrification. I actually think gentrification is an economic process. If we get stuck on the culture war stuff around it, we won't see the bigger picture, which is fighting the vested interests that want to devour our city and move all of us out.
Yeah, and like I'm not going to pretend like I haven't indulged in that kind of like fuck off back to. Do you know what I mean? But not in a. It's kind of funny because if they're from the home counties, then you're kind of a bit. You don't care as much, but then. But you are actually correct, and the thing is, it doesn't feel that serious because like. I've moved around London, do you know what I mean? And so I can have those accusations levied at me. Do you know what I mean?
I've got dual citizenship. My dad is a Hackney Turk who came here, has been here for a long, long time. My mum has been lived in London, I think, since like the late 70s. So I can really lean into my authenticity politics if I want to, but I can get some solace in it by being mad about. Growing up in Battersea, the changes in Battersea, becomes Chelsea. The joke is that Battersea became like Chelsea. Do you know what I mean? From this like radical bastion of working class culture to the processes that local government helped to enact. But we have got to build the coalition of people that are missing out. And I think the biggest threat at the moment is that group of like hardworking, basically like people who are locked out because of skyrocketing prices, who are in flat shares and renting, and half their money is going on rent. The right are really desperate to divide them away from council tenants, social tenants. They want to breed a politics of resentment. I think the left have to be really, really careful to navigate how housing is going to be used by reform, by the right, to kind of a kind of racialized London working class versus like hard-working person from the home counties or whatever. And we have to crush that, because that is they've always wanted to destroy council housing, social housing. They've had that mission since Thatcher. A lot of their arguments are just rehashed versions of that using.
100%.
And so I think it's important that Londoners recognise that and build the bigger coalition, which is like, actually, we should all be allowed to get access to rent-controlled public housing. That is obviously doable. We did it in times in this country where the economy was in a way worse position.
So let's talk about 2022 to 2026, where you knocked the Tories out of their 44-year control. What was the mission going in with that Labour team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a amazing, kind of exciting moment. It was the culmination of years and years of work. No one thought we'd ever be able to do it. There was definitely a kind of like, wow, it's finally happened after 44 years. Under the amazing leadership of Simon Hogg, who was the leader of Wandsworth Council. And I have to really emphasise, I'm a left-wing person. I was a member of Momentum, and I was in the cabinet, and that was because of the pluralistic culture that had been developed locally. And I really think that was possible because we had a real enemy. We weren't like one of these Labour bastions where all the Labour Party has to fight is each other. We were a place where we had very serious Conservatives, like a well-funded, serious Conservative opposition. And so we pulled together, and people who are like competent and good at their job and have ideas and want to make life better for residents are part of that team. So I think that was a really important part of what made the Wandsworth project special.
So did you have quite a Labour-esque spectrum within that council? It wasn't like a left-wing council.
It was like genuinely it was pluralistic. It was really pluralistic. And if you've spent enough time in local government, you do learn that they're kind of like clear binaries on that scale. It doesn't really work like that. Like, people have different politics on different issues. And what was magic about the 4 years we had was that, Simon came from a background, he worked at Shelter. He really got housing and was willing to do radical things on housing. So the first thing we did is the Conservatives in the 2018 election, which we won, the 2018 election, got more votes than the Tories. We just didn't get the right spread of votes. So we won the popular vote.
In Wandsworth?
In 2018, yeah. I've won 3 elections in Wandsworth, and we've only won one of them. So electoral reform, please.
Yeah. Wait, so why is that? Because it's a first past post system within Wandsworth?
It's the spread of seats. So you can win the popular vote and not get enough seats. So in 2018, we won the popular vote. 2018 that was like a high point Corbynism election. Turnout was really high. Front page of the Evening Standard is like Wandsworth could go Momentum or some crazy scare story, right? Just ludicrous stuff.
Those were the days.
Yeah, exactly. And so I turned my ward red for the first time since 1992. All 3 of us got elected, but we didn't make it over the line. So, we were in opposition again. But that, why I mention this is that the process of us building the project that was to win Wandsworth was one deeply enmeshed in housing policy and the experience of what Wandsworth Tories had done in housing policy. And in 2018, to challenge us and try and fight off the left, the attack from the left, the Tories had come up with something called the 1,000 Homes Programme, which was a house building programme where they would build infill on our existing estates, so like garages, disused parking lots, bits of pockets on our own land, and they would build 1,000 homes. 400 would be council, and the other 600 would be sale products, so either sold outright or a shared ownership product. And so our big campaign, and it was an interesting response to the left challenge, right? It was like they were saying, okay, fine, we will build some housing. But our response was, this is public land. This is the last pockets of public land we've got left. So you're basically going to privatize 60% of it because these are sale products on the, and we've got low interest rates. It's a perfect time to borrow and build council housing. So our big thing was we were going to take over and flip that to 100% council, which is what we did. So on the first day is we just immediately flipped the 1,000 Homes programme to a 100% council housing programme, which was a challenge because, a couple of months later, Liz Truss with the mini budget blew the economy up. Interest rates suddenly spiked. So the payback period on the loans that we went from 25 years to a longer period. But we were willing to do that because we said that's an absolute key priority, is building council housing again. We did other things like in the private rented sector. We wanted to make sure we weren't just covering, we knew that everyone was suffering in housing. So for our private renters, there'd been no licensing. Wandsworth had almost no regulation. It had been a laissez-faire council with private renters. But we had, I think, one of the boroughs with, if not the most private renters in London. So 36% of our entire borough were private renters, and yet they had the lowest amounts of protections. So we set up a specific team which was designed to, we started rolling out licensing. We did an additional license across the whole borough for HMOs, and then we started rolling out selective licensing. We've built up an entire inspection team now, which the first in the borough's history, which can go and challenge landlords, take road landlords to court, ensure standards are met. We can talk about what we were going to do, because there are lots of things you can do now with the Renters' Rights Bill using those enforcement teams, and I can come on to that. We gave out secure tenancies again. So the Conservatives had these flexible fixed-term tenancies, which kept council tenants kind of constantly having to reapply. No one ever got moved on. It was a pointless fear. It was expensive. It actually cost more money to run than we ever got back in social housing from people who weren't eligible for it or didn't. So we just went back to the traditional model of like secure tenancies. The only it was on the larger properties with like 4 and 5 bedrooms that we extended the fixed term tenancies. That's just in case all the kids move out, and we've got so many people with families in waiting lists that we thought that one was on balance. We started negotiating with developers, and developers actually, what developers want is stability. So we explained, look, we want to prioritize social housing out of the affordable housing criteria. So less emphasis on shared ownership. The Tories in the 10 years, from basically 2010 to 2020 had a policy of 35% affordable housing. They'd only hit, I think, 18%. They were meant to do a 60-40 internal split between social and quote-unquote affordable shared ownership. They had overwhelmingly prioritized shared ownership to about 80% of that internal split. So they had just basically artificially reduced the amount of social housing that private developers were willing to build as part of planning policy. We think we lost about 4,000 social homes during that build out unnecessarily. Like developers would have built it out. It was just planning policy, and they just said, no, you don't have to, just build us loads of shared ownership. That 4,000 that we lost was almost exactly the amount of people in temporary accommodation. So we have this huge amount of people in temporary accommodation. It's costing the council 60 million a year to fund, 30 million from us, 30 million from the government. So we really started trying to prioritize how do we make that temporary accommodation better. So we set up a temporary accommodation forum where people who live in temporary accommodation get access to the officers and me as a politician, because there's this huge democratic deficit in London where you can be a Wandsworth tenant who was made homeless through a Section 21 or something. You can't find anything else because rents have spiked, so you go and present homeless to the council. Council puts you in temporary accommodation. You could be out of borough. So now you can't even vote for the person that's making the decisions about your life. Like, how do you get that democratic access? So we set up this temporary accommodation forum, and then thankfully at the same time, South West London Law Centre was doing a bit of a campaign around conditions in temporary accommodation. And look, this is the body that challenges us as a council. Like, most councils don't want to have to sit in a room with the people that are constantly taking them to court for their statutory failures. But we were like, no, you're a critical friend. You need to help us get that temporary accommodation into a better place. And so, you know, we let them pressure us, make us feel uncomfortable, have officers in the room saying, like, having testimony from residents who are living in that temporary accommodation to push towards what is now known as the 5 Basics campaign, where the 5 basics of temporary accommodation are like ability to get access to Wi-Fi, affordable storage, you know, like key information so you know who to contact within your temporary accommodation, cooking facilities and washing facilities, I think is the final one. We did things with our own temporary accommodation stock. We, you know, the Conservatives, there was a place called Nightingale Square where the Conservatives wouldn't even put in a laundrette. So the families who were in Nightingale Square had to go to pay for the laundrette and just carry their luggage. And they could be there for years, and yet they couldn't, because washing machines couldn't fit into the properties. So we obviously just like built a council run laundrette where it's like free, and it's not even, I say built, like we just bought loads of washing machines and like put it in a room and then people could use it. Like it's like just like things that
Basic
so
dignity,
easy.
yeah.
Built a beautiful playground for the children there, where Tories have said we're not going to build a playground because it could cause families to fight each other. That was their, like, we wanted to build
But
a
isn't
playground.
that just them coming up with
yes,
bullshit?
to save money.
Because you said about having what were the South West London Law
Centre,
Law Centre. You said about it being not wanting councils traditionally not wanting to deal with them, but like you said, if your mission is to go in and help the residents, help the people you're there to represent, and actually that's not really a contentious thing. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, you're actually doing half my job, which is highlighting kind of what needs to be done.
Yeah. That's the thing. I think it's really important to not get scared of pointing out that like councils are strapped for cash. They're in a really difficult position. There are really difficult choices. You have to democratize that process. You have to say, look, these are the options in front of us, and we're going to tell you what they are. And sometimes people won't be happy with those decisions. Like, it's so funny that I get attacked online for being a NIMBY or whatever, not enough of a YIMBY, when like some of the fiercest battles we had was trying to build council housing on our existing estates, often from council tenants and leaseholders, because they didn't actually want that council housing there. They'd say, I don't want to lose my parking space. Like, I need it. And we'd say, well, I'm really, really sorry. I completely understand. In an ideal world, we wouldn't be building on this car parking space, but we're in a housing crisis. We've got thousands of people waiting in accommodation. We've got thousands of people on your estate who are overcrowded. We're going to make this difficult decision. I know you're going to hate me for it. And you'd have to sit in a meeting and people would shout at you and they'd get really upset. But as long as you're kind of like honest and accountable and you do it in a way in which you like articulate yourself rather than hide, I think that's the best you can do as a local councillor.
Wait, so where do these NIMBY accusations come from? What's that about?
Oh, well, as in like, because I challenge developers and don't let them build whatever they want.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, local government to me is like, from an outside perspective, I'm thinking whether it's Labour or whether it's Tory or whatever, it's just like corrupt. Essentially, that's what it feels like. And most of it, when it's London, is like property development corruption, where it's just kind of like your job is to facilitate kind of money flowing to and fro. But let's talk about the last election. How was that for you? How was it? What kind of response did you face trying to campaign on your record when, in many ways, the national government was on the ballot for many people?
Yeah, it was really hard. It was really hard. Yeah, it was really hard. And
you bucked the trend, though, right? Nationally, slightly, no.
Well, the trend
you didn't
was
get wiped out.
We didn't get wiped out, so we lost. It's really. I made a video saying what would happen, and then it basically happened. And I was like pleading. I was like, I know a lot of people here who are really angry with the Labour Party want to vote Green, but if you do that in Wandsworth, you will get a Conservative council, and it will be down to a handful of votes. And I said, look, in 2022, we lost a seat in St Mary's by 10 votes. In Balham, we only got Joe Rigby elected by 26 votes. I said this. I said, look, if the progressive vote splits, And the attack wasn't, I'm going to blame the Greens, because the genocide in Gaza and the Labour's position on it, the crackdown on civil liberties and protest, and the announcements they were making weeks before the election, like people, good people with my morals, my politics, were saying, I not this time, I can't do it. And we could showcase our record, like we had been fighting for pension divestment. I've been on every single Palestine demonstration for 2 years. It's it's part of my own kind of like politics and coming through as a student, and just, but that was a very, very real, Mandelson. I mean, your audience know, everyone knows that the Labour Party purged, crushed, told its left, get lost, you've got nowhere else to go. And they did. They went to the Greens. So we were fighting against those headwinds. I would try and point to our record. I'd say, look, Wandsworth is a model, and I genuinely believe that local Green candidates in Wandsworth and local Green members in Wandsworth do think Wandsworth Labour was quite a special and unique political project. They would say as much to me, but I just don't think we're in this moment where people think first past the post almost no longer exists, which is the wrong analysis of the current political moment. I think 2024, with the success of independence, with the way that the votes fell, people suddenly thought, oh, there's actually an opening here. And they're right, there is an opening. We are seeing the first past the post system buckle, and political fragmentation, that is happening, but it is still happening within the system. And so you have to be strategic within that system. And the local election results are showing that Labour is losing its votes to the left, undoubtedly. But loads of places, Labour did come second, Greens came third, and Reform came first. And I said in the video when I was predicting all this, I said, look, Gorton and Denton was like the high point of the Greens saying, look, anything is possible. But Gorton and Denton is a very specific seat. It's a really solid Labour seat where the progressive vote was always massive and the Reform vote was always quite small. And the question was the split between the progressive vote going to let Reform in, and who would get the bigger chunk of the progressive vote? So that's kind of a seat like built for a Green challenge.
Like Hackney, really.
Yeah, Reform are not going to win Hackney. The Conservatives are not going to win Hackney. But Wandsworth was not that. And there are lots of seats like Wandsworth across the country. And so for me, the day after the election, the kind of, obviously, the pain of being proved right, we lost by 1 seat, and we lost that seat by 16 votes. And now the Conservatives are back in. And the 500 council homes that have permission that I wanted to build are likely to be either scrapped or sold. A whole host of I haven't even been able to talk about access for all, borough of sanctuary, what we were going to do for private renters, like all these things, these very important.
What is the borough of sanctuary?
Borough of sanctuary is where you design your council services to welcome refugees, support people who recently arrived. So all those kinds of things, which are very much like our way of challenging the national Labour positions on a lot of these questions, will be undone, sadly. And so, I'm not going to come on here and go, wow, the responsibility lies with the National Labour Party and the decisions we've made. And everyone's kind of up to that. Like a week ago, I might have been a bit more scared of saying that on a podcast. But now even the NEC are letting Andy Burnham run because everyone can see what has happened and knows what has happened, and the kind of McCarthyism and the fear that we've been living under, there's a bit of
it's kind of lifted a bit.
Well, it's lifted a bit because everyone's like, well,
And they've also kind of been discredited. Like Morgan McSweeney is now, like, people had stopped talking about him as this like strategic genius and more as
the right wing project that everything that we said would happen has happened. Like it's not like it's annoying, and it's not like it's not even a nice thing to be proven right on, because like we are witnessing possible Reform government in a couple of years because of how disastrous it's all been and how fed up people are with the status quo. There are some very serious structural challenges like that we could touch on, like the crisis of the British state. It isn't about personalities. Like Rishi Sunak came in really popular and left unpopular. Like we haven't, what is it going to be, 6 prime ministers in 7 years? Like, that is not an accident. That isn't like to do with political parties. That is a crisis of the state that we can discuss. Like, it's not, whoever comes in is going to have some very, very serious challenges, and the left have a proposal for that and the right have a proposal for that, and we've got to fight to get it. But the strategy to get to that place where we can have that fight does rely on progressives not shooting each other in the foot.
Yeah, I mean, like, the lesson from 2019 and 2024, right, is that actually Reform, or whatever they were at the time, Brexit Party, did stand down for Boris Johnson and did think strategically for Boris Johnson, and they didn't do that in 2024 because it wasn't like they didn't want to attach themselves to Rishi Sunak by that point, I guess, and they had different ideas. And the ground for negotiating or being strategic seems very fertile because, like, at the end of the day, yes, the Labour Party is very toxic, but also within the Labour Party, there's people like yourself who are literally like friends with the people who are now in the Green Party. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we're different, like we're the same people.
Well, half of them were in the Labour Party.
Well, exactly. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's not like we don't know each other. So surely there is real space for cooperation, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this by-election with Andy Burnham is a good... What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, again, like Wandsworth, a strategic decision has to be made. Like, this is a Labour reform fight. And, I think that they have a democratic structure whereby the local party, so the Green local party has to decide whether they run a candidate or not. From what I hear, they are going to run a candidate. How that will be seen by the general public, broadly progressive general public, and their own membership will be interesting. Because I think, from what the last 48 hours or whatever, I've seen most people on Instagram, they're just saying, please don't do this. Please don't do this, aren't they? Right? Like,
it's interesting because I get it. I actually think that maybe they should be talking directly with Andy Burnham about what kind of negotiation, you got to negotiate. You can't just give away stuff in politics. But at the same time, if they do run a candidate and we get another Reform MP, it's not just about that. It's not just about that by-election. It's about the whole vibe of the country. And actually, I think it will do them a lot of damage about who they are, because they are supposed to be this pluralistic kind of politics, right? That's what they're giving. They're saying, we are here to change how we do politics. We're more about cooperating. We're more about bringing people together. Whereas just going, I get it. The Labour Party did it before when we could have stood down a couple of seats, under Corbyn. We could have.
I've got to be careful here. I've got to be careful, but I'm going to go for it because it's that isn't really Corbynism as a left-wing project, right? The Greens weren't cooperative with that as a project. So that when that was the kind of insurgent, hopeful, once in a lifetime moment for the left in British politics. So I think the question becomes, and this is the thing, being in the Labour Party, right, particularly over the last couple of years, obviously with someone with my politics, and I think I just keep having to say this, particularly around the genocide, right? Particularly around the genocide and decisions around civil liberties, unbelievably difficult personal decisions have been made by lots of people, not just me. And the question it comes back to is, to be part of any political organisation is to give yourself over to something bigger than yourself for a broader set of goals. The calculation I made was I could feel very good for a short amount of time personally. I could.
Is this a calculation as to why you're staying within the Labour movement, or what?
Well, I'll be in the Labour movement until I die. But the calculation around why, when people obviously always say why are you still in the Labour Party? Why? But I say, in the area I grew up, because of the decisions and the being serious about what I can and cannot change, by working and building for my politics within the Labour Party, I could build council housing named after Shapoorji Saklatvala, you know, that will materially change the lives of people who've grown up around me. I can build physical things that will last for generations of, you know, that wouldn't exist if we hadn't done that, if we hadn't put that work in. And the Labour Party is a site of struggle. Like, it's not like a football team where you're just like, oh yeah, I'm for the Reds and you're for the Greens. If the Greens end up thinking of their political project as how do we make the Greens the most successful and not the broader picture of the left, that would be the same mistake that loads of people make within the Labour Party. What is in the interest of the Labour Party and not in the interest of the broader politics that we on the left as socialists in the Labour Party want to achieve, right? That for me is really, really crucial. Like, I am going to stay and fight for my politics in the Labour Party. Now, we are at risk of getting to a place whereby the Labour Party might die. And it's not inconceivable. Like, people have to think really seriously, and lots of people are filled with joy at this prospect. You know, like, look at the French socialists, Hollande, right? The French Socialist Party did just like die. This like very long, well-established center of the two-party system in France, it did die. Like, that could happen. In our current context, if that happens, the winner is reform. Like, my old Turkish dad walking down the street, is he going to get bashed on the head, knocked out when I'm not there to look after him under this reform government? The things that Trump has managed to do in term 2, like, I am not one of these people, first Thatcher, then us. Like, oh, like, we'll build the Greens to 80 seats and then, okay, we might have a reform government, but then after, no. We cannot let a reform government come in. I don't think people understand how dangerous this is. Like, we could be in jail. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is an authoritarian, dark money, billionaire, far-right project that is explicitly whipping up levels of racism and xenophobia, particularly against Muslims, that we haven't seen in our lifetimes, I don't think. I think we've gone backwards compared to when we were growing up. Like, we grew up during the War on Terror. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, during the War on Terror, it was bad. Like, and I saw progress from the War on Terror. You know, the thing that, you know, I think about someone like Jeremy, who stayed in the Labour Party during the Iraq War to fight for his politics. That is the kind of strategic decision that I have taken, personal decision, political decision. I call it strategic, which makes it sound like a calculation. It's a deeply moral and political decision, because I think that I broadly want to try and stop a reform government, and I want the left to be able to cooperate in a smart enough way to do that. And that is the only answer I can really give. And I'm not, you know, again, it's hard to know what you get done for these days, but like, in no way am I going to punch left against the Greens on this question. The question is a strategic question. I have a different strategic outlook to them. I have, you know, in my analysis of the conjuncture, my analysis of the material conditions and the balance of class forces we have in this country just happens to be a bit different from the ones who've jumped over and gone into the Greens. But we have to have a serious discussion about where we go from here. And, you know, electoral reform is obviously part of that discussion.
I used to think I used to be quite emotional about voting, like the difference between being an active member of a party and voting. And I've actually come to the position that you can't actually be emotional about voting, because voting, I used to see voting as tick, I agree with everything, I sign Lewis underneath everything that you've done, right? Whereas now I look at voting as one tool in which I need to look at, right, what's my worldview, what are my core principles and beliefs, and what is going to get me there? What is going to help me achieve it? And sometimes it means voting strategically, sometimes it means staying with someone strategically. And I did find the situation with the genocide was incredibly hard. And I found watching the American election quite interesting, because that was a huge part of the American election, right? And people were saying it's actually reasonable for people to not vote. And this is when I started thinking about not vote Kamala Harris because of the complicity, or not just complicity, but like active participation of America in that genocide. And I thought, the alternative is Donald Trump, right? And so by voting against Donald Trump, you are not actually saying that everything they're doing is correct. You're just trying to strategically stop Donald Trump. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think about that? Is there ever a point where you wouldn't vote for a Labour Party, or is there a line that you wouldn't cross?
I am an elected Labour Party official, so
yeah,
I
I
would
can't really say
always
that.
vote for the Labour Party. Luke Akehurst, if you're watching. No, I mean, it comes back to the point I'm saying. To be in a political party, the Labour Party is not this magical thing. It is a site of struggle. Zoran ran as a Democrat. He didn't run as an independent.
Yeah.
You know? Now, he could do that because of the primary system. He could articulate his politics. Zoran would have been not just blocked from being allowed to run. He probably would have been suspended.
Yeah.
Like, and like expelled for his politics before he even got, so there's a challenge there's that strategic challenge. And lots of people made the conclusion that we can't win. We can't stay and fight in the Labour Party under this level of McCarthyism, right? So the shift in the party at the moment is an opportunity to try and rebuild some broader, genuine left politics in what is still a party that is polling between 20% in this split, right? That is not, is not dead yet. The other point to make, right, is is trying to remove the personal, which is very difficult in politics, but to try, like you say, and remove some of the personal moral questions from your own individual choices and think about under first past the post, politics is about building coalitions. That's what we were saying earlier about you as long-term Londoner having to join comrades from the counties who have come in and are struggling with their rental situation, right? Like it might seem, there might be some personal, but broadly, politically and strategically, that is the correct decision to make, right? Now, we can disagree on strategy. Like there are lots of my own comrades, people on the left who are no longer in the Labour Party, who disagree with the strategy. And we can have discussions about strategy. But that is kind of different from maybe that moral or personal feeling that you have around who you might specifically vote for. And that is the tension between to be involved in politics and be involved in life, is to work out where your levels are on that. I always think what I'm doing broadly helping the left? Or to frame it another way, and this is, I've stolen this from Jeremy Gilbert, right? Like there is a line in this country between those people that want to kind of drastically redistribute wealth and power, the democratize and resources, the people who drastically want to rebalance wealth and power in this country, and those who do not. And that line has never been between the Labour Party and the Conservatives. It has been through the Labour Party. And now that line has shifted further. Quite a small line between the Labour Party and then the Greens on it, So, but that is like my agency, the agency I have as one person in this world is to think about strategically about that line and how we push that line. And, in doing it in the most useful, efficient way that I can use my skills to help with that project. That is the project of being a socialist, right? Is to constantly be making evaluations around that line. And socialists can disagree on whether we're doing the right things or not, but that is the fundamental. It's not like, this is my football team, this is your football team.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's look at the future. I want to hear your opinions on what's going on. By the time that I think you'll still be PM by the time this comes out. What do you think will happen over the next 3 years versus what do you think needs to happen within the Labour Party over the next 3 years? Let's thinking in the next 6 months to the end of the Parliament.
Yeah, so this is back to the crisis of the state question, right?
Yeah.
So if we zoom back, and I'm going to take a really technocratic, centrist analysis of the crisis of the state, right?
Go for it.
You have the 2008 financial crash at a time in which British productivity and GDP growth has been okay, but productivity has been stagnating a little bit, but you have this crash. And at this precise moment when interest rates are low, and it's a massive opportunity to try and rebuild the productive forces of Britain, because we have this productivity decline relative to other places, aging infrastructure, that kind of golden window, we sadly get the Conservative government who do austerity. So they don't use the historic low interest rates to borrow, to build up the productive forces necessary to get our economy back on track. So productivity continues to decline. If we are, and again, that's why I'm saying this is a centrist analysis right here. If we are fair to them, they do focus on trying to get the deficit down. So by cutting the austerity that they're doing is in order to try and rebalance the fiscal challenges of having too much debt. Yeah. Then they catastrophically fail at that as well because of the COVID crisis. So they managed to reduce the deficit slightly. Not, was it worth the social violence, the cost of the people who died during austerity, the lack of building all the infrastructure we need? As I say, I'm just in this mode, a technocratic centrist. But then their own project of reducing debt and the deficit is undone by the COVID crisis, in which they, the furlough scheme and the stimulus, where we put our economy on freeze, it requires loads and loads of borrowing. So whoever has inherited this terrible British conundrum, which is like we're snookered, because we actually are struggling now to borrow without the gilt and the bond markets punishing us, because they say, well, you're over leveraged, your debts are too high, but we've got nothing material, no infrastructure, nothing returning rent, because it was all furlough and the energy crisis. So like it's a really difficult macroeconomic situation facing Rachel Reeves and whatever government comes in. This is the genuine crisis of the British experience, right? Which is like, we somehow need to get our productivity and our infrastructure and our public services back online, but we've been snookered into this position by terrible decisions by 14 years of Conservative governments. That is a hard thing to get yourself out of. There are kind of two options that the left and the right are, well, there's the kind of reform option, which is we're just going to slash the state. And by the way, we're also going to stop migration, right? So like we're going to plug, they've got the bath metaphor, like, well, we've got to plug the bath before we turn on the taps or whatever, some deranged thing, which doesn't make any economic sense, because obviously like places that have faced similar crises like Spain are just like having lots of migration, and that is what is sorting some of their productivity issues. So the migration thing is a red herring, but it is very effective, emotive. There's a common sense logic for lots of voters where they just think like, oh yeah, we've got to, if things are hard now, how can we have more people?
Yeah.
There's a kind of, that which they exploit.
What's been the story that was what the Tories were using for 14 years.
Exactly. And then the other, you've got the kind of Gary economic side of things, which is like, well, actually the challenge here is that in order to build up the productive capacity of the state, we need to get some of that revenue that floated out of our economy through those big spending stuff, which goes to the top and the super rich. And we need to redistribute that wealth back down and use that to get our public services back online. So a tax question, a wealth tax question. And that anyone who's coming in is honest about that challenge and has a left-wing project where they say, this is the decision I'm going to make based on this criteria. Because the thing is, like, Starmer just didn't do that. Like, the problem with Starmer is Starmer, like, just totally pivoted to the... First, he was, like, vague, would talk about the challenges but wouldn't articulate them properly. Never explains the genuine compromises and class contradictions that were, like, inherent in this situation that we find ourselves in. The fiscal rules are necessary, but the fiscal rules... they made it out that the fiscal rules were super necessary in order to stop the bond markets from doing a Liz Truss on us, but without articulating why on incomes and why not on wealth and assets, and not coming up with a populist message that could explain to the country that actually, like, there is wealth, it's just like badly allocated and the state doesn't have the capacity to build up its own wealth at the moment. So I think, unless whoever is the challenger, I hope it's Andy Burnham. I hope Andy Burnham wins that seat. I think if we, like you said earlier, this is a world historical. It's
There's a lot riding on it. There's a lot riding, yeah.
Huge amount riding on it. Like, I
don't think there's ever been a situation in which, like, a by-election is dependent on who might lead the country next. like in 2 months' time or whatever it is.
To your
Do you think he's got it?
to your
Do you think he's
audience?
got it?
You do not want to wake up on a day in which reform have won that
No.
seat. That is would be crushing.
And they will win on something stupid like 25%. That's what's crazy. Maybe 30%. Like the. So what is it?
So a Burnham project needs to really have a strong platform to address that very real crisis, because otherwise, in 6 months' time, we'll be in the same position and another prime minister.
Yeah, I'm back. I said all that about not being emotional, yeah, but like I hate the Labour Party right now. I hate West Streeting. I hate Keir Starmer. But I'm sorry, I am one of those people where if it was like Andy Burnham and Angela and Ed, I'd be like, Labour, yay! I do love those three. Sorry, I said not be emotional, but I am kind of romantic when it comes to those lot. Like I do like them, even though I know they've got problems.
You are representative of large swathes of a very important part of the country. That is why the project that I'm talking about is the one that I think is going to work.
Yeah.
Because I do think lots of people can still come back to Labour. The thing we have to decide, have you ever seen that meme? It's a meme of like a skeleton holding a gun and it says, I don't want a Labour government, I just want revenge. We have to try and avoid that becoming the political debate on the left.
Well, yeah, I can see that. There was a time when I'm like, I want to see him crash and burn, but at the same time, like, I'm kind of getting my revenge on Starmer right now. Like, I'm loving what he's going through right now. I'm loving the resignations because he did it. He did it to Corbyn. And I watched an interview of Corbyn where he was giving Starmer his advice and saying he felt sorry for him, and I just thought, beautiful, beautiful. But yeah, I get you. Like, I still think a Labour Party is important, and I still think a Labour Party with union affiliations is important.
Because people again, if we pull ourselves away from the emotion and the individuals involved, right? It's like a lot of people are really, really struggling. Like when you work in local government, you see the sharp end of the front line.
Yeah.
You see the stakes. You see the like, oh my God, there's actually some things that might take 10 years to fix. And in the meantime, this kid is going to be living in temporary accommodation.
Yeah.
You know, like the stakes are so serious. The threat of reform is so real. Like, you know, you just look at the Unite the Rally thing was tragic and not many people turned up. But like the idea that you're allowed to just perform that kind of racist stuff in central London. I haven't seen anything like written by Mark Rowley about that. You know, they'll make interventions against the left. They never make so the stakes are so real that I think, you know, I'm heartened that you yourself, but also I just know lots of people are also in the Greens. Like, you know, loads of people in the Greens are seriously thinking about broader questions. There's a guy called Ali Fogg who I saw on Twitter, who very influential in the Gorton and Denton by-election, and has been writing seriously and thoughtfully about the difference between the seat Andy is running in and Gorton and Denton, right? Like, and what that means for the Greens and what a smart left strategy is. So I don't think but we just have to, you know, it is difficult because our heart, you know, it's about heart and head, isn't it? Sometimes.
Yeah. And I do think like, as much as I like the Greens, I did vote for them in the locals where I was, and they won the council. And I like Zach, and I'm proud of what he's doing. I do not think that they have yet shown themselves capable enough to actually take on reform across the country. I think they've shown themselves to be capable in specific areas with specific people and be able to like hit on Labour's heels, but I'm not confident that they can go into like these like post-industrial towns that are like gutted and really take on reform in a way that we kind of need, in a way that like I think maybe Andy Burnham has more of a chance of doing. That's just where I'm at.
If we just lived our own personal political politics, we would probably be selling newspapers on a demonstration.
Oh my God, don't tell me.
Okay?
I used to beef with those.
But I'm saying like, what I tried to say earlier is like, you give yourself to a political project that is bigger and larger than yourself. I believe in a mass politics. Like, I want to be part of a political movement party that is trying to form a government. I got really angry when I heard that there were kind of places in local government where people they didn't want to win, they just wanted to be a large opposition, you know, and that for me is like anathema to my politics. It's like the left should always be trying to win so that it can deliver. It can't just be an opposition. Opposition is not a victory. Increasing your opposition seats is not a victory. And maybe in times in history, someone might be able to say, well, actually, strategically, if we do well here and then we build and then at the next election, sure. But like that is not the position we're in. We're in a position facing down a reform government. We don't have the time for a 10-year strategy. So like, I think that question of like mass politics, a mass politics that is looking to win the country, produce a government that can deliver real changes, is essential.
What do you think a Wes Streeting-led Labour Party is going to bring us? Like, I won't lie to you. He says he's got 80 nominations, and I am genuinely shocked, given the circumstances we're in right now, that there are 80 elected MPs that think that the answer to this is Wes Streeting, and the answer to this is, I don't get it. But anyway,
but given the selection process and how like literally run by his mates it was, he should have way more. Like that's
I get it, but
that's the shock. Is like many of the people who've been selected, like the 2024 intake, are all people that were like literally handpicked by Mandelson. So like that is the real shock, and I think that again speaks to that our analysis of the situation has been fairly consistent and correct.
That's why I'm so concerned, because it's full of these people who think Wes Streeting is the guy. I don't get it.
So, you know, all I can speak for is the work that people on the left and the soft left are doing to try and make sure that we have a candidate that represents the direction that we want to go in.
Okay. Being very diplomatic. No, yeah, well, it's principles over personalities, and I respect that. I do. Okay, we have covered a lot. Let's say, what is something that you have had enough of?
I'm going to do a housing one. I got to do a housing one. Okay. I've had enough of these free market fundamentalists talking down social housing. The whole Twitter ecosystem of like attacking one of like the most, I think, important legacies of like 20th century social democracy. That infuriates me, and the kind of racism and almost like eugenics attached to some of the discussion. It disgusts me, and it gives me fire as well to fight back and fight for my politics.
I do think there is a wave in the left of like understanding that we need social housing. Like it's such a massive crisis. Yeah. Okay. What is something that you can't get enough of?
London summer.
London summer. You're ready for it?
Best place in the world. Best place, 25 degrees. I can even go higher. London summer, clear blue sky. There's nowhere
Where's
I'd
the
rather.
best place? Where's the best
nowhere
place
I'd rather
to
be.
spend a afternoon in the summer?
I'm going to be sunbathing. I'm going to be cycling around. I like to go. This is really pandering. Pull-up bars, outdoors.
Oh yeah. You love them. Do you use those
calisthenics
things?
Yeah. London is the greatest city.
Are you there
in
on the
the
council
summer.
being like, we need more pull-up bars?
We literally built pull-up bars on some of the new build council estates.
Do you know what? My mum loves those. Those. Yeah,
we built those as well.
She does.
Yeah, for the aunties.
Yeah. So no, they're good. They're good, and they're actually. Do you know what? They're actually a really good place of community and socialization,
100%.
especially for young men. Since we're talking about this, like
100%.
We're in the era of like talking about male loneliness and stuff, but like so many, particularly straight guys I know, have like communities of hanging around by the bars.
You literally talk to people. Like you'll see someone doing something, you'll have a conversation with them. Like I remember when I was first on YouTube when I was like 16. One of the original fitness influencers was a guy called Scooby, who was he was a gay guy, but he wasn't out. He ended up getting outed when the right wing turn happened, but he was like I guess like one of the first fitness influencers on early YouTube, but was like the perfect like masculinity like kind of left soft. I'd say soft, like guy was jacked, but like as in like the opposite of the right wing pipeline. He was like about doing things healthily, like giving training advice, affordable training advice. So like all the calisthenics stuff, he would like teach you how to build a gym in your house if you couldn't afford gym membership. So much of it was about affordability crisis. Like now when you see a lot of fitness things, it's like in these super expensive gyms, these people are on loads of like gear and stuff. Like that world, and then also seeing like the bar stars in like Harlem and New York, and that space of, again, like very working class, male, urban, collective fitness where you do it with your friends. Like that is a way of, you know, trying to build maybe a left culture in a space that is now just dominated by like right-wing influences.
Yeah, you got a good point. It's free as well. I think gym culture being like all these memberships. I'm a member of a gym and all of that stuff.
Did you ever
But,
join Labour Gains?
Did I ever? I didn't join Labour Gains.
Sure,
No.
do you know what that is?
I remember.
During
it.
lockdown, during COVID lockdown, we did an online. It was like our whole project had died.
Yeah.
You know, Corbyn was gone. We're all locked in our house. So we did like Labour Gains, which was like the Zoom workout, and like people beamed in all over the country.
Well, I remember it on Twitter, a Twitter account. I remember it. Yeah, man. Like I do. I agree with it, and like it's. I'm a member of a gym. I talk to loads of gym guys, and like reform is swimming around there, man. Reform is swimming around there, and we don't realize. I think some people anyway on the left, or maybe the liberal left, don't realize like how much is swimming around. Like I'm talking about guys who go to a gym where there's like loads of Muslims, and then you go on their Instagram and it's like fucking anti-boats, it's fucking Nigel Farage memes, and you're like, yeah, it's there, it's swimming around, and it might catch us off guard, and my worst nightmare is that we get a Trump situation where they end up chipping off a couple of like just like black and brown men who go, do you know what? Like I'm just because it's part of
they got Zia Yusuf, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But they might run that. They might run him for an MP, right?
Well, the amount he's on fucking TV, he may as well be running as an MP. Like he's always on telly, that guy.
No, but I mean him against Andy.
Is he going to go for it?
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea.
I actually think that, sorry, we're going a bit over, but I actually think that the reform strategy of running high-profile people might start to wear thin on them.
Yeah.
Local it's. I do think Matt Goodwin got embarrassed. I did love that. And if they keep doing this kind of like, I don't know, I think that might be the wrong place to test the Yusuf. I don't know. But they are going to put up a big fight. Oh man, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
I've literally learned so much. It was thank you for your time. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate it. Nice one.